It's a woman that Mike very much preyed upon. They were mutual friends, ended up kind of singling her out, talking to her on the phone, basically starting phone sex with her, telling her to stop having sex with her husband and asking her to meet him. I spoke to a victim today, gave me permission to share what I'm going to share in a minute. And the whole Matthew 18 thing that everyone tries to throw, it's like, look at all the people that privately went to him. And he lied to all of us.
Even whenever this investigation comes out, if it's even made public to us, who even knows how much of it is the board even, is that even enough for them to be like, you need to take a seat? Or are they just like, it doesn't seem like it is. It seems like they'll just let him keep going because that's what they did for his son-in-law.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Wake Up and Win podcast. We're your host, Blaise.
And Christina.
It's great to see you guys tonight. We just completed another interview regarding the Michael Brown investigation, and this was with Catherine Marielke.
Good job.
Oh, I'm so proud of myself. That was a tough one. But she really did a great job. Very caring, very well-spoken, and just, I mean, she was really able to break down a lot for us tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought she was incredible and just, yeah, I just love her. So
And it took a few turns that were really interesting on the exposure side, and really, you know, we talked a little bit about what God is doing through all this as well, you know, overall in the body of Christ, which really does sincerely feel like, in a strange way, a move of God, because it is bringing so many people who may have lost their faith over the years from these movements in the past to going, oh my gosh, this is why what I saw was off. This is why, you know, this makes sense that this person is being exposed in this way, that way. So anyway, it was an interesting conversation, and especially regarding the investigation with Dr. Brown right now, with Michael Brown. This conversation needs to be had.
yes, definitely. And if you haven't, go back and listen to the one with Londa too after this, because it helps piece everything together, I think.
And thirdly, if you haven't, go back and listen to Chris Bennett. Maybe we'll do a playlist, because these three pieces bring everything together. And yes, we know there's an investigation. Yes, we understand the implications of that. But also, these people need a voice. These are the eyewitnesses to these matters, and their voice really does matter. So we're really thankful that she came on. So, okay, guys, enjoy. Drop a comment. Drop a like. Share this. You know, with anybody that you think it'll be helpful, and yeah, jump right in. Okay, without further ado, here we've got Catherine Marielke, and Catherine goes by Kat as well, and she has a background with, your parents were like good friends with Michael Brown and Nancy Brown, and then you were on the mission field and you were involved at Fire School of Ministry and everything. So I want you to kind of give yourself, you know, if you could tell everybody the story of how you got involved, and you witnessed some things going on over the years, which right now Dr. Michael Brown is under the investigation, and you also came forward to the Roy's Report to tell your side of the story with things. But as we said, even with Londa recently, we said it's so important that even though this investigation is going on right now, it's so important for people to hear your voices. And so we so appreciate you coming on. And I know you've been talking to Christina, but just introduce yourself and give us a background of who you are and how you're involved in this whole big story here.
Yes. Well, as you said, my name is Kat Marielke, hard last name to pronounce, but you guys did it well. So yeah, my parents, we're originally from New York, and my parents met the Browns probably the late 1970s at a small church in Long Island that Mike had come to. There was another church he was at in Long Island. There was a split or something that happened there, and Mike and a couple of couples came to the church that my parents were at. Powerful move of God. It just kind of really connected my parents with the Browns. There was a split at that church, which it's kind of interesting. There's just a long list and kind of trail of splits in Mike Brown's wake, just even from back then. And so through the years, my parents stayed connected. We were in New York. Their family ended up moving to Maryland, still in close touch. Anytime Mike wrote a book, he would send our family a signed copy. And then I remember he got involved at the Brownsville revival in Pensacola, which, if you're familiar with anything related to Mike Brown's story, he was a significant figure there. Ended up joining the church as one of the speakers, and then started a ministry school, Brownsville Revival School of Ministry. When he and Nancy moved to Pensacola, they reached out to my parents and they're like, this is the move of God that we've been praying for, waiting for. And they were very kind. They flew some of our family members at different times to visit the revival. Back then, if you're familiar with the revival, people were standing outside in line sometimes for like a day, hours by the thousands. And because it was Mike Brown, we could just go in with Nancy, like in the back door, right as the revival started, had great seats. They hosted us at their home. So we had a good relationship with them. I wouldn't say it was super deep or close in some ways. But yeah, it was a good relationship. And through that, my oldest sister ended up attending the Brownsville School of Ministry. I believe it was in 97. And then I ended up going down in 2000. My parents ended up moving down, I believe, in 2001. They left New York, moved to Pensacola. They didn't end up on the mission field. I did a couple years later end up a missionary through that organization to Thailand for a couple years. So that's kind of like the backstory of our connection with the Brown family.
Gotcha. So when you got there in 2000, you went for fire school and ministry, right?
Brownsville. It was
Brownsville. Okay.
last semester before the split. Yes.
Okay. And when the split happened, did you go with fire school, or what happened with you after the split happened?
So, yeah, I mean, so at the time, I don't remember the amount of students at Brownsville, but it was almost like a clear cut down the middle. Half stayed at BRSM, half went to fire. I know somewhere in there, there's a percentage of people that never came back. But Mike Brown, after the split, started a ministry school literally just kind of down the road from Brownsville. And because of the relationship and in our growing up, Mike Brown was like the man of God. And like we followed him, we listened to him. And so there was never a question that we weren't going where Mike Brown went.
Interesting. Okay. All right. And then tell us more about, I guess, where we're at today. All of these stories are coming out. I mean, there's been people that saw so many things. Obviously, we know that Sarah Monk has come out with her story. So tell us kind of how you got involved in going to the Roy's Report, and over the last year, there's been people coming out and you've been connecting with other eyewitnesses. Tell us a little bit more about kind of how you got involved in that portion of this story at this point. This episode is brought to you by Wake Up and Win Insurance. We've been helping clients all over the United States with term life, whole life, universal life, and annuities for coming on 8 years now. If you're looking for a way to protect your family, life insurance is probably one of the best ways to do that, and it's not hard to get in place. Work with over 25 insurance carriers, and I can help almost anybody in any situation. There are also ways to do infinite banking concepts, which is basically life insurance with a savings account attached to it. I've got a lot of clients that really like that option. If you're interested, hit me up, link below, schedule an appointment, and I'd be happy to do a free consultation and see if I can help you out.
And I think we kind of hit on this a little bit when we spoke. So the Brownsville revival, definitely huge call to repentance, get right with God. Very strong holiness culture, and especially at the school, the standards for sexual purity and morality were like super, super high, to the point where, just constantly discussing wardrobe. If you went home for break, or if you were in a relationship, had a boyfriend or a fiance, and you crossed certain physical lines, you were called in and asked in like grotesque detail, like how far you went, whose hand went where. And it was extremely intense in terms of the standards that they had for sexuality. A lot of shame for the women, especially. And it was just a really strong, intense culture in terms of what was taught, what they expected. I don't know if we talked much about that when we spoke last time, but that's kind of a key significant piece, because people at that school were getting kicked out left and right if they crossed lines with their boyfriend or girlfriend, if a girl didn't dress modest. So there were really strong standards there. And so I remember, years down the road, kind of putting different pieces together, but think of the culture being that way at the time, even to the point, if you were first semester, you were not allowed to date. And they would have ushers that would kind of watch where people sat. And if they noticed a girl sitting too often next to the same guy, she would be corrected. It was just pretty intense. And during that time, this is after the split now in 2001, I was friends with Sarah Monk, and she was, I don't know exactly her title, but she worked at the school, and you never, ever saw Mike Brown without Sarah Monk right by his side. And it was interesting because post-split, you did not see Nancy ever at church. Maybe once a year. She worked at the offices, but very, very much on the back end. You didn't see her much. Nancy at the church, as I said, just not a visible figure at all. But Sarah, who was probably 20 or 21, very sweet. I believe she was from Texas, and she was there. She worked with Mike. Anytime I passed or went near Mike's office, Sarah was always in there, sometimes by herself. Mike and Nancy had a huge house outside of town. Sarah would often spend the night. Mike asked Sarah to call him dad, said that he was her spiritual father. And I remember seeing her leaning on him, cuddling him, kind of holding his arm. I saw at least once at their house, Sarah sitting on his lap, kind of leaning up on his chest.
And this was at their house.
Culture.
This is at their house. So like, was his wife home and his like family home?
So his children are grown. Nancy was there for sure.
And did he act like that in front of his wife? Did they act like that in front of his wife? Really? Wow.
I never saw Nancy and Mike touch, but I saw Mike and Sarah touch a lot. And but again, back then the culture was so conditioned that like we revered Mike. He was the man of God.
He could do no wrong.
Absolutely. And looking back, it was that culture very much conditions that. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even think in my mind once to question it at the time. In my mind, I was almost like, this is beautiful. Like she's like a daughter to him, even though I have a father and I don't sit on his lap. He doesn't, you know, we don't do that at my age. I don't know anyone that does.
I just have to build context again for everybody listening. It's like, you know, because we spoke to Londa as well, and there's more interviews coming out about this. And I just, you know, thinking 42-year-old man, like building this context of a revival culture where there was strict holiness culture. And I mean, what Londa said was that even the married couples that were students were not allowed to show any physical affection. Like they couldn't hold hands. And so you've got this culture that like
married couples can't hold hands, but she's sitting on his lap.
In the house. Yeah, in the house, sitting on his lap. And then the wife is there, Nancy, and you guys don't see any physical affection there, which makes me wonder if there was something projected onto the students like, well, if you're married, I don't want to see y'all having physical affection because we don't have any physical affection. Who knows? But it is awkward, and I almost wonder if how well he has conditioned everyone over many, many years to believe, even at this point, he literally thinks that he can tell everybody meaning the audience out there in the world, yes, Sarah was 20 or 21, and yes, I was 42, and yes, she sat on my lap, and yes, I rubbed her shoulders, and yes, I kissed her on the mouth, but she was only my spiritual daughter, and we were not sexual in any way. Literally in his mind, saying that, I wonder if he conditioned Nancy in the same way that she allowed him to have this woman sitting on his lap. But it just makes me wonder, you know.
Yeah, it is very strange.
The whole Nancy piece is definitely a mystery. But even to go back, I'm so glad you said that, Londa said that about married couples forbidden to show any PDA. Do you guys remember the events like the call, the big prayer gatherings? Mm-hmm. So I was 18, a student at Brownsville, and it was the first one. It was the Call DC, and we took charter buses. And I remember being on a charter bus, and there was a couple there on the bus, and they were newlyweds. And you're on a bus for like 20 hours. And they were very like touchy-feely, not even kissing, but like leaning on each other and snuggling. I kid you not. The person that was in charge of our bus came back and corrected them.
Oh my gosh. That is so weird.
I know. It's so, and they would like kick students out of school for the most bizarre things. One time there was a girl that wasn't even at school, but like posted on her social media. It wasn't even scandalous, but she was in a bathing suit. They called her in and she got kicked out of school. Like it was very extreme.
Yeah.
So yeah, very, very, very interesting culture back then. Very uptight. I'm all about morals. I'm all about rules and guidelines. But this was in a way that, I mean, it took me years to shed the shame that just that culture heaped upon us. And so it was really interesting now looking back that,
Totally. Well, it was the same. I mean, around the same time, I was in a ministry school where those were similar things, but it wasn't that intense. I don't remember there feeling like, but people would get kicked out for stuff for sure, but I never remember anything. Well, first, there wasn't any rules against married couples like showing affection. That to me was the biggest thing that was like so strange.
So
When I heard
bizarre,
that, I went,
yes.
I get ministry schools trying to figure out like, okay, what are the boundaries for these? Like even at IHOP KC, I remember in internships, there was like trying to draw hard lines on what was like acceptable and unacceptable. I get the struggle of that as like a ministry leader and figuring out that. But at the same time, I'm just like, let me ask you a question. You said if a woman was sitting next to a guy too often, she would get in trouble. Did the guy get in trouble, or was that more so like a cultural thing where they like pointed at the women as the problem? Or
In that situation, it was kind of both, but there was definitely, I mean, there's endless stories. Like that could be a whole nother podcast series, but there was a
gotcha.
pastoral care department. And yeah, it was definitely a honing in on the women were the problem. We were the object of temptation. And it was our job to make sure the men didn't stumble. So yeah, it was very imbalanced back then.
Yeah. Well, then if you have a guy like Mike Brown who's doing these things behind the scenes, like I think back to different leaders in my life and ministry guys that would say things, but I would see their lifestyle as the same. And
Right.
seeing behind the scenes was always encouraging to go, okay, this is their marriage. This is their life.
Right.
This is the real deal. But having that type of thing where you go, oh my gosh, this guy's saying this and he's not even affectionate with his wife. And then he's affectionate with this 20-year-old. Like it would have to be
Right.
confusing for the men in that environment. Like, who spoke to us? Chris Bennett. Like I imagine
Chris
like Chris
Bennett.
Bennett
Yeah.
going, wait a second, which he got the revelation like 20 years later, whenever he was older and
Right.
married and going, hey, asking his wife, would it be normal if I held hands with another 20-year-old?
Yeah.
She's like, no. He's like, okay, Mike Brown did that.
No.
That was weird. Okay. We can keep going on the story.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Yeah. Keep going on the story.
Yeah, so that Sarah, as I said, she was a buddy of mine. She worked at the office. Very common, as I said, the physical affection. And I know there's other people too that had witnessed Sarah sitting on Mike's lap. It wasn't just me. I didn't know at the time Chris's situation with seeing the hand holding and other people being concerned, seeing them alone late at night. That all came later. But what I did know that always stood out to me as odd, as I mentioned, my parents were very good friends with the Browns. At that time, I believe my mom was helping at the school, and Mike and Nancy's daughter, Jennifer, was getting married in the DC area. And my mom was flying to the wedding. And I think people even raised money to get a ticket for Sarah to go because she was like a family member to the Browns, so they wanted her to go. And a handful of days before they were supposed to fly out together, Sarah's at my house trying on dresses that she could borrow for the wedding. And this was a day and age where not many people at all had cell phones. And my mom and Sarah were on the same flight from Pensacola to Maryland, and they were supposed to meet at the airport. My mom's at the airport at the gate, and Sarah never shows up. And again, there's not a way to reach my mom. She's at the airport. So my mom's concerned. She gets on the flight, ends up going to Maryland, goes to the wedding and says to Mike and Nancy, like, Sarah never came. What happened? And they looked at her as if it was like nothing and said she left to go to Texas to be with her boyfriend, which none of us, and I'll get back to that. It's confirmed that that was a lie. There was no boyfriend she went back to. And they kind of acted like, oh, it's almost like she vanished out of thin air and was never spoken from again. It was the most bizarre thing. But as I said, we were so conditioned to just, okay, you just take them at their word, that no one really questioned it. And again, it wasn't until years later that I started scratching my head being like, okay, this doesn't add up. The girl just disappeared without a trace. Yeah. And then looking back and remembering the physical contact. So anyway, that I think that's around 2002. And again, another thing for context, I remember in this same season, there was a couple that got married within our school, and they had a wedding. And back then it was forbidden to dance. And at the wedding,
I love how you say
students,
forbidden. It was forbidden to dance.
and it was forbidden. But at this wedding, a bunch of students danced. And I mean to like very innocent songs. I don't even think guys and girls touched each other, but they danced. And I remember that Scott Volk, who was Mike Brown's assistant at the time, got up and basically corrected the whole school. And I'll tell you why this, like, again, just blows my mind, because there's so much more that we know now. Not only was the Sarah thing happening, but the issue with the other married woman that we now know that Scott even knew about back then. But here he is correcting the school because there was very innocent, fun dancing at a wedding. Yeah. So just bizarre. Just the imbalance is mind-blowing.
Okay. Scott, who is Mike's assistant, right-hand man, Scott knew about Ray's wife.
Yes. And I know for a fact, too, Scott at the time was made aware of people's concerns about Sarah. Because I know Chris Bennett and Nels Pripp, who was another person that was really involved in the beginning of all this, set up a meeting to talk to Mike Brown about this inappropriate hand-holding. And I think another guy, Keith Collins, had seen them late at night alone at Walmart. And so people just had some questions they wanted to ask Mike about. And Scott was aware and supposed to go to that meeting, but at the last minute, like, bailed. But I know he was aware. And it came to my attention as all of this was being exposed in these last couple months. Someone referenced that Mike confided in Scott everything about the married woman, which I know you guys have discussed. It's a woman that Mike very much preyed upon. They were mutual friends, ended up kind of singling her out, talking to her on the phone, basically starting phone sex with her, telling her to stop having sex with her husband and asking her to meet him. And so anyway, this woman ended up confessing to the husband, Ray, we'll call him Ray. And Ray confronted Mike, and Nancy was there. And of course, Mike lied the first several minutes of the conversation, but ended up confessing to everything. And it came out that Mike told Scott about all this. And I know that for a fact because even Ray and Ray's daughter texted a friend of mine because they asked and they said, yes, Scott knew. And so at this time, for whatever reason, they felt it was okay to cover up that people are concerned that Mike has his hands on this young woman, but young. Plus, he's sexually preying upon this lovely married woman. And all of us had to expose our sin and get kicked out, but they felt it was okay to smooth it over and handle it secretly.
That's mind-blowing.
So again... Yeah. Mind-blowing. And to know that all these years later, because I know that Ron Cantor went to Mike, confronted him about all this in the fall, and, it didn't really go over well. So then Ron went to the Line of Fire board, which Scott was on at the time, and Scott acted shocked about all of these allegations. And now to know that he knew. And I confronted him on it. And, I love Scott. He's a great guy. But I'm sorry, I find this deplorable that they knew all these years and did nothing. And this married woman has since passed away. And Mike's whole initial response to all of this was that she was the seductress, basically.
Oh, my gosh. To throw her under the bus, basically.
Yeah.
And the board didn't stop him from sharing that. And I'm like, Scott knew.
They knew that wasn't true. Yeah.
At least Scott. And so again, mind blown, I thought my mind blew beyond the point of like, it couldn't blow any bigger, but it did.
Yeah.
Through all this stuff coming out.
So this is helpful. And I think, it's interesting whenever people kind of plug into our podcast, sometimes people follow every single detail so well. And then other folks jump in on a random episode and they're like, okay, what's going on? So just to contextualize for everybody again, if you're new, Dr. Michael Brown, well-known charismatic leader, teacher, preacher, like he's got his hands in so many different mediating for scandals. The Todd Bentley thing, we're literally in the middle of watching that get re-exposed. And one of the things that's coming out is that Mike Brown sat in front of Todd Bentley in 2019 and said, you have to confess everything. And when you do, there's no coming back to ministry. And this was Michael Brown, who had his own sexual indiscretions and what I would call clergy sexual misconduct and abuse. Yes. And so for the body of Christ, what is the point of pulling up things like this from the past when people would say, or even Mike Brown would say, I repented of this so long ago. I dealt with this so long ago. Well, clearly he's not dealt with it because he never truly admitted to the things that he actually did to Sarah. And then he never truly admitted to what he did to Ray's wife. And then what that leaves is the body of Christ over the years. Because men that do this once, and then do this twice, you know that there's more going on there, because there's no true accountability. Just because you repented privately behind the scenes, there's no true accountability, there's no true reckoning. And so I would not be surprised if there weren't others that he's covered up for, or others that he's done. And so this needs to be talked about. It needs to be put out there. And so again, we just thank Londa and you and others, and Chris and others that are coming out and bravely, especially like Ray. I think about Ray being like, he lost his wife to a sickness, and now this story's coming, and then he watches Dr. Brown, Michael Brown, lie about his wife and say, hang on, guys, I'm going to go ahead and just come out of the woodwork here and say, what the heck? That is not what happened.
Not only that, but he himself was betrayed by Michael Brown as a leader and as a friend, as a mentor, like all of these things. He was betrayed by him. Then to have his wife pass and then Dr. Michael Brown come up and talk about her that way is so wrong. It's so wrong.
And last thing I'm going to say, and then bring it back to you, but for Michael Brown to say, at this stage of the game, and we know that those conversations over the phone with her, that he wanted to meet up with her, that he was basically having overly sexualized conversations with her, then for him to say publicly on his Line of Fire podcast broadcast in response to all this, to say nothing was sexual, nothing was, for him to say things like that, it's literally a blatant lie. We're watching this man lie and gaslight the whole charismatic world.
Yes. 100%. No, and it's so good, kind of just as you said, if people jumping in to get the context, and I'll dive into that more too, the cover up and kind of what he said are the ultimatums for Todd Bentley. It's like, well, it's funny that applies to Todd Bentley, but not your son-in-law, and we'll get to that. So where were we on the story? Okay, so fast forward a little bit. I had started noticing, again, we were hook, line, and sinker, like Mike Brown, follow him to the death. And my family, we had relocated with his ministry to Charlotte. My sister had married somebody that the Browns had known from their Messianic community back in Maryland. Mike Brown, this is how deep our ties run with the Brown family. Mike Brown officiated my sister's wedding. My sister's son, her first son that was born, Nancy Brown, was in the room as my sister gave birth to her first son, videotaping. Like, we were very connected. Yeah. And so I had seen my sister and her husband had since moved to Nashville. They were not connected with Mike or his ministry for years, other than just the history. My sister had 3 young boys. At the time, both my parents were working with Mike Brown at the ministry school. It had relocated to Charlotte. And I had started seeing a pattern of frayed relationships with Mike. People that stood up or disagreed with him kind of were all of a sudden like cut off. And I started getting concerned, and even talked to my parents, because they saw the Browns as some of their dearest best friends. And I remember even saying to my mom, I'm like, I feel like it's just a matter of time before they're going to turn on you. I'm just seeing some patterns I'm uncomfortable with. And interesting enough, and it's not my story, so I won't dive into it too much, but my sister started having major marital problems with her husband, her first husband, where I could just say it, and I think everyone will know what I'm talking about. There were more than enough biblical grounds for her to leave him. Mm-hmm. And I remember she called my parents and let them know that she was going to file for divorce and needed to separate and leave this man. It had just gotten to the point it was no longer healthy. And my parents called Mike as a friend, just to, my parents were just, their world was falling apart. And they call Mike as a friend to let him know. And my mom's like across the house as my dad's on the phone with Mike. And she said she could literally hear Mike screaming at my father from like the other side of the house. And he was irate. He was livid. There was no solace. There was no comfort. There was no pastoral care. Mike was furious, saying that my parents cannot support my sister getting a divorce, that Mike is the spiritual patriarch because he married them and knew them both.
What in the world?
You can't make this stuff up. My parents were they're already shaken because their daughter, was going through a nightmare that I'm a mother. I can't imagine my daughter going through what my sister had to go through. They turned to their friend, who's also their spiritual leader, for help and comfort. And he's literally screaming at them, saying, you cannot support your daughter divorcing him. And of course, thank God, my parents are like, no, we're standing with our daughter. And like a day or two after that, Mike calls a meeting for all the staff and leaders at Fire, and my parents are there. And they're in their weakest moments, they're fragile. And Mike decides in that moment to ask the people around the table, Scott Volk's there, Bob Gladstone, different people, and just if they could share grievances that they've had with my parents.
Are
And
you
I,
serious?
yes. And this is all, I mean, there's so many people that can confirm this. Everything I'm sharing with you guys, I'm so careful because number one, this is so sensitive, all these things we're discussing. Anything I'm sharing, even like what I shared about Scott's knowledge of the married woman, I have seen texts from Ray saying, yes, Scott knew. There was a room full of people that can corroborate that, yes, Mike did this to my parents. I don't know if his intent was wanting to like force them to resign, is what ended up happening. And my mom even looked around the room. She's like, this is so wrong. And everyone back then just followed in line with what Mike said. That was, again, the conditioned culture.
Yeah.
You have these, a room full of good men that just felt like it was godly and right to submit to their leader no matter what. It's like
we saw that at a local church here. We saw that same thing at a pretty big mega church where and it's this covering theology that gets so deeply ingrained. And you said it, you got these strong men, godly men, and instead of protecting their wives, protecting their friends, they just go, well, this is what he's saying to do, so we'll all just fall in line and do it. Right. So they just ripped your parents to shreds basically right there because Mike said.
Because Mike said. And I will say, and it's been beautiful, I've had amazing interaction because I've literally not talked to any of these people, Sarah, Ron Canner, Londa, in like 15 to 20 years. This has not been my world or circles, but it's amazing with all this coming up, the connections that are reforming. And we have had beautiful interaction with Bob and Gina Gladstone, and they have very humbly like apologized for how my family was treated and for not standing up to it. And so that's been a beautiful part of it.
That's awesome.
Even though I hated that my parents went through that, my heart was almost like, I'm so glad, because I'm like, they need to get away from the Browns. I was seeing a lot of toxicity. I was really concerned. So obviously my parents resigned. Mike went the extra mile to like go on a warpath against my sister because she's leaving this, this husband that Mike didn't agree with. Mike never called my sister. A very busy man, took the time to call 2 or 3 of my sister's close friends that Mike had known because they were also grads and connected with his former ministry school, telling them to to cut ties with my sister. None of them listened, and they all told my sister, and they would corroborate to this day that they received those phone calls. So my sister reaches out to Mike, like, what, like begging him, like, what is going on? And he was mean. He basically said, God hates divorce. And since you're getting divorced, you and your 3 sons are cursed. And that shattered my sister to the core, like traumatized her to the core, like years and years and years of just having to work through stuff from somebody that you look to.
Well, yeah, she trusts his spiritual insight. And even if you're kind of frustrated with that person, you're like, you still can be so deeply affected, which I would just call it like spiritual abuse, like to say you're cursed because you're cursed. It's mind-boggling.
And your children.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I'm talking, they were like 1, 3, and 5. Like, how could you as a leader, as a man, and again, Christina, you'll understand this more, as a woman, when a man, especially any man, but if you have an authority figure and you talk to a woman that way, it can rattle you so deeply. It's so disconcerting. And then to be in the situation that she was in, so fragile, and that's how she was treated, just so that kind of severed the relationship with us and the Browns. Obviously, there was I had a lot of emotions. I have zero bitterness to them. I was angry. I don't respect them. I don't trust them. But I had moved on. I had got married that same year to my husband, Nate. He was in Michigan. I moved up to the Detroit area. Definitely, was rattled by that whole situation, but I just was like, you know what? Thank God I'm not in those circles anymore. Just moved on. The church that we were at in Michigan, our pastor actually had ties with Mike Brown. and brought him in maybe 2 or 3 times over the 10 years we were there. Never once did I speak an ill word to my pastor about Mike Brown. I had no bone to pick, no vendetta. I was just like, again, you're a figure in my life that is in my past. He really had no significance to me. I wasn't like sitting thinking, how can I bring this man down because what he did to my family. I just didn't think of him. And even I ran into him once or twice when he came to the church, and I was cordial. Like there's been no like animosity or hostility.
Well, sometimes these things don't really come to full light until the puzzle pieces all come together. Like one person can experience a negative thing from a spiritual leader, and you can see it as negative, but you might not see it as like spiritually abusive and controlling and dangerous. Then 20 years later, you've got all the lights coming on because you're like, oh, he was also in these relationships while he was telling people that we're bad. Right. And he's telling my sister she's cursed, but he's like messing around on the side.
Well, that's the thing. As you're saying it, I'm like, okay, so he is doing these things, and your sister, you said, had biblical reason to get divorced. So he sees himself in these guys. He sees himself. And so that's why he acts like that.
You're exactly right. He's angry because he's like, no, you can't do this because my wife could do this to me too.
Christina, that's the whole time that has been my thought process. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too. Again, I can't share names, but I remember this today. There's another couple that were grads from his school, and the husband was a serial offender in terms of, having affairs, and they were youth leaders. And I know for a fact he was having affairs even with teenagers, to the point where I think he got arrested at one time because it was statutory.
Jeez.
And I found out recently that this girl would call Mike Brown for advice. And I'll give you one guess what his advice was to this woman.
What was the situation? Stay. The wife would call. Oh, of course.
Mm-hmm. Wife would call Mike Brown.
And he'd say, don't get divorced unless you want your kids to be cursed.
Sorry, I'm a little slow.
You're like, what'd he say?
I'm like, what happened?
you don't get the prize.
She wins every time. She's a lot quicker than me.
But just like, I can't imagine in what universe this is acceptable, except like what you said. It just has shown me how normal this is for these people. Like, you talk to people that are outside of the church and Christian circles, they would think this is deplorable.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's it's just insane. And so to get to that too, another reason why I think that it was so hard for Mike to see my sister stand up to her husband right around the same time, really close same time frame. Mike has a daughter named Megan. She's married to a guy named Ryan Bruss. They had 2 kids. They have 2 kids, and they were younger at the time. And Ryan and Megan were living in Texas, working at Steve Hill, who was a very prominent person in the Brownsville revival. It was his ministry that kind of helped spur on the outpouring Father's Day 1995. And he was at the Brownsville revival, I believe, till 2000. He went to Texas, started a ministry school called Heartland. And he invited Ryan to come and be, I don't know the exact title, but Ryan was helping lead the ministry school. Around that time, I remember all of a sudden seeing Ryan and Megan back in Charlotte. And Ryan just didn't look good. And I heard through the grapevine that there was some moral mishap with Ryan at the school. I think that it was maybe even painted like maybe an emotional affair. The word that so many people love to use, which who knows what it means, soul tie, whatever it was. And so I remember not long after that hearing, I had then moved to Michigan during that time, but that Ryan then was overseeing Fire School of Ministry, which I thought was odd, but I didn't know too many details. But I do know that Mike said to my parents, like, I understand what you're going through. We're dealing with something similar with Ryan and Megan. But to me, it's like, okay, just because you want to push your daughter to stay with this man, don't put that on my parents. If my parents are more than supportive, my sister leaving situation. So anyway, fast forward, I think it was 2015, 2016. I'm living in Michigan. I meet a couple dear friends and we're talking. They're from Texas and they mentioned Heartland, that they went to this ministry school in Texas where Steve Hill, it was his ministry school. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, and I know Ryan Bruss. And they kind of looked at each other and looked at me and they're like, oh, we know Ryan. And they disclosed the details to me of what happened there. They were acquaintances or friends with the girl that had had a sexual relationship with Ryan. And to make it a million times worse.
So that's what a soul tie is.
Oh, that's a soul tie.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
apparently that's what it is. Now we all know. I'm sorry, keep going.
If that's what a soul tie means, then a lot of people are in trouble. Oh my gosh. So, 18. She was their family's She was their family's nanny, and she was a student at the school.
Jeez.
And that just shook me in a whole new way. And this was even kind of before the whole Me Too emergent, movement, and people were thinking that way. Historically, whenever there was affairs or stuff in the church, we kind of always blamed the woman. Or if a woman came out and said, I was assaulted, this and that, we kind of discredited the woman. I'm so thankful in recent years, especially this last decade, that we've given voice and credibility to people. I mean, even the whole thing with Bill Hybels, no one believed these women for years. So back then, this is 2016. I feel like things were the tide was starting to change, and something in me just really was so unsettled about that. And I remember it was 2017. Again, Mike Brown is such a distant figure in my life. I don't think about him. From time to time, Sarah would come to mind, and I'm just like, okay, how odd that I'm remembering this man having his hands on her, they're physical, and then she vanishes. I'm like, there's something there.
Yeah.
And it just bothered me, in the knowing about Ryan. And so in 2017, I saw on one of Mike Brown's pages, he put this whole post about, hashtag Me Too and being an advocate for women, and we as church leaders need to stand up to this. And something about it just triggered me, and I couldn't help myself. I'm like, I need to write this man and tell him exactly how this post makes me feel. So I copied and pasted the post and I sent it to him, and I said, I am struggling reading this because I have one name come to mind, and I can say it now because she's come out. I said Sarah Monk, and I just kind of disclosed everything I said to you guys, just how I would see them very physically affectionate, her sitting on his lap, her sleeping at their house all the time. I think I even mentioned, because I think I'd heard wind, that Chris Bennett had seen them holding hands, and that they were alone. And I just kind of called him out on that. And I even said to him, I said, I'm speaking for my husband, but I said, if we had a daughter and we sent her to a ministry school and I visit, and the president of the school has his hands all over my daughter, the way you did Sarah, I said, my husband would kick your bleep. And again, I'm like, this is coming from me. And I'm so glad I'm married to a man like that. And then I brought up too, I said, kind of the rules for thee, not me, and mentioned the whole Ryan Bruss thing. And at that, I don't think I went into detail, like the details, like she was 18, she was a nanny, she was a student, but I just said, I know the details of that. And I said, the fact that not long after, Ryan is leading the student body at Fire, and there's no disclosure. And Nancy's never to be seen, and like, just, all my concerns. And of course, I knew it would happen. He wrote back, and I was shamed for thinking.
Were you gaslit into oblivion through his return email?
Yes. And it didn't even affect me, because I'm like, I knew it. Like, I knew the man enough to know exactly how he'd respond. And again, the whole lie. And it's what he spun to so many people. He literally said, Sarah, there was nothing sinister about Sarah leaving. She went to Texas to be with her boyfriend. And anyone that's asked her if there was anything sinister, she even laughed at them. Like, no, I went to see my boyfriend. And he admitted, he's like, everything you said, you're right. It was foolish, but that was the extent of it. God forbid. And I didn't know at that time about him touching her behind or kissing her on the mouth. I think I would have been even more fiery in my email to him. But he admitted to all the stuff I saw, but he lied to me. He's like, that's the extent of it. Nothing ever further happened. And so
did you know about Ray at the time? Did you know about Ray and his wife? Okay, gotcha.
Oh, no.
Okay.
So I didn't find that out. So that was 2017. The only person that knew that I wrote Mike was my husband. I even said, I think at the end of it, I was like, I'm not even writing this to you to expose you. That's not my intent at all. I just had to let you know the hypocrisy that I'm feeling. I could not say anything. Because at the time, I literally, I've had so much on him, even how he treated my sister. I could have, shouted that from the rooftops. I'm like, that's not my place right now. And that was not my intent when I wrote him. It was more so to be like, this is really bothering me. So that was 2017. I know that a handful of people I had spoken to since, Chris Bennett, I don't even know who. I think there was a group chat on Facebook that was like a recovery group from Brownsville fire days. And it was actually Londa, because nobody said, none of us had discussed Sarah. And Londa kind of brought it up, like, does anyone ever remember that? And she had her whole thing, like she saw notes with like hearts and love you and all this and that. And we kind of were putting pieces together. And I had mentioned, I didn't disclose the messages, but I said I actually confronted Mike about this myself in 2017. And then around 2020, I had heard that Chris had confronted Mike directly because Chris had gotten a hold of Sarah. Myself and other people through the years would reach out to her on Facebook. And once we ever asked, like, hey, what happened? You never came back. Like, we didn't hear back from her. And, I didn't push it because I didn't want to push that because obviously you could tell it hit a nerve. Chris Bennett finally got through to her. I know he spoke to you guys. This is 2020. And he went to confront Mike with Keith Collins. And that's when he brought up that whole dirty letter that was on their nightstand, which again, I can't imagine in what universe a spouse would be okay that there's a letter like that hanging out in your bedroom. So anyway, I know I'm talking a lot. Is there anything you want to ask or like me to expound on?
No, you're doing good. I love that you're like explaining everything perfectly. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you're breaking down the timeline. I think one thing that you mentioned was about 2017. I wasn't aware of that, and I know you probably shared it in the Rose Report, but there's just so much out there. So I think that's really interesting that you did that because I was thinking in my mind, the next thing that we know of was a 2020 confrontation with Chris Bennett and Keith Collins, and I'm going, what else was there?
Well, I was going to say, one thing I was going to say while you were talking that I did notice is, okay, so you're having these thoughts and feelings and even confronting him. Chris Bennett is having these and he's confronting him. Londa is having these, but there's this idea of you don't gossip. You don't talk about it. So nobody knows that this is happening and you don't know that other people have seen the same things that you do. Whereas if you guys were like, allowed to talk about anything, then you guys could have come together and like even all confronted him together with all of your facts, we all saw this, but it just makes me so mad because I'm just thinking about him standing on stage at IAPKC being like, do not talk about this. Do not talk about it. Do not gossip. Yep. Like this we'll do an investigation and it'll come out. But like that mindset and that culture that he preached of don't talk about anything. And it puts so many people in danger, really.
100%. Yeah, it's controlling. And here's the thing that makes me so mad about all of that. Because even recently, Dan Juster with Tikkun Ministries put out this whole post, basically same thing, like, we just need to wait for the investigation, don't talk about it. And it's like, well, that's so easy for the men with platforms and large audiences who have influence and they have a microphone.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. They can talk, they can spin the narrative however they want. And then people who don't have that, they're telling you don't even talk about it amongst yourselves. It's like the inequity is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the whole Matthew 18 thing that everyone tries to throw, it's like, look at all the people that privately went to him. And he lied to all of us.
It is
Y'all did Matthew 18. Yeah. Everybody did it.
Yeah, yes, we did.
And also talking about, like you mentioned, his son-in-law, Ryan, who has had, I guess, multiple affairs and is still keeps being put in these ministry positions, just kind of shows you, I don't know, even whenever this investigation comes out, if it's even made public to us, who even knows how much of it is the board even, is that even enough for them to be like, you need to take a seat? Or are they just like, it doesn't seem like it is. It seems like they'll just let him keep going because that's what they did for his son-in-law,
Oh, yeah. I wrote the board, and now it's only two people on it, Jonathan Burness and Cindy Penapento. I wrote them just because I've not spoken to them directly, but through mediators, I've just been really disappointed in their response, their approach, their missteps so many times through this process. And from my gut, I just wrote them and basically spelled out, like, this is the man we're talking about. And I brought up about Ryan, and I'll get to that too, even more recent situations and things that I spoke to a victim today, gave me permission to share what I'm going to share in a minute. And this was a year ago. And this is, there's a lot of repeat offenses by Ryan, and he just keeps getting elevated. I don't know what he's doing now, but through the years he was with Sid Roth on TV, given ministry platforms. And when you have a platform, you are in an easier position to prey upon people.
Yep.
Yes.
And you said a repeat offender. And here's the problem in this ministry circuit, this ministry system, whatever we've been doing for the longest time is not working, in the sense that, even the whole idea of, well, maybe we can get a council together. Maybe we can hold some people accountable. Here's what I'm going to say. I don't think, like, since the Reformation, we don't really have a central hub anymore. So at this point in time, here we go. It's like the power of the press, unfortunately, has to be the thing that actually does 1 Timothy 5:20. Yes. Because back in the day, people weren't traveling from place to place nonstop. I mean, sure, they could go to some places, but it was like, you got to travel by boat. It takes forever. Yeah. Nowadays, you can be an offender in one state, get totally busted, outed, and then bounce to a different state 3 months later, and then start a new church. Right. And nobody knows. Right. And so it's like, you know what? We're done with it, because we're done with all these guys seem to be repeat offenders. These issues are issues of control. They're issues of, they love power and control. And I wouldn't even just say that they're all sex addicted, but I have a feeling that a lot of them are addicted to power, manipulation, and control. And when they get these younger people, or even, it doesn't even have to be younger, it can be people within their influence. As soon as they see me as the prophet, or they see me as the most the most biblically literate, and they have to believe my interpretation of everything. Now they look so up to me. Right. I can do this, that, and the other. And they repeatedly offend. And that's why I'm concerned about Michael Brown. And that's why I think every single leader in his generation needs to be just as concerned as we are. Yes. We're not just the younger little guys like, oh, y'all stop. We think that folks in Michael Brown's generation need to be more concerned about Michael Brown's activities when he was our age, and that he was able to continue on, because repeat offenders is the example we saw with Mike Bickle. And Mike Bickle's patterns are very similar to what we're seeing as Michael Brown. He only admits to what he's caught for, and Michael Brown is doing the same thing. So, but go on to Ryan Bruss. What you learned about today. We'd love to, sadly would love to hear that at this point.
No,
be helpful.
I hear you. So one other thing too that came to mind. So the culture at Fire, where Ryan was, there was a girl that I knew that was on staff. She was married, and she had an affair with another married person. It was found out through the years, even at Brownsville. It's kind of like the culture, like you publicly confess sins, and so she publicly confess and repent. And you can bring Ryan Bruss, who's having sex with his nanny, his children's babysitter.
Barely legal.
Barely legal. I mean, there's so many offenses. She's your kid's babysitter. She's in your home vulnerably. The power dynamic there. The age, the power dynamic there. You're over her in a highly charged spiritual environment. The power dynamic there. Like, that to me is so egregious.
It's disqualifying in every single way.
For life. Like, it's and again, there's grace. Like, Jesus forgives everyone. This is not about that. Go
get a job and love your wife and your family for the rest of your life. You can do that. Pray for the sick. Preach the gospel to your coworkers. But don't go become like a power. You don't need a power position anymore.
No. And I can't, again, as a parent, and I have 2 daughters, if one of their husbands did that, I believe that my position, unless they're like, I just love him and want to stay with him, I would really look to help her leave that person, not bring her to my state and give that man a position at my school overseeing young people for the most part. You're talking about more 18, 19-year-olds. I just don't.
That's the thing we talked about too with Londa. It's like so unfair to these parents and to these other students because, like you said, as a mom, I want to know.
Gosh.
I want to know if the
Yes.
guy in charge just left a ministry because he was sexually abusing somebody in his care who was not only his nanny but his student, and who had literally just turned 18.
And as a husband, I want to know if there's a man that has been preying on married women in the congregation. I'd like to know that before we go to his small group or go hang out at his church. You know what I mean? It's like,
so it needs to be disclosed.
so Mike Brown should have disclosed it according to his own standard that he made this woman do, who was an admin. He should have disclosed it for himself to the entire ministry about what he had done with this woman over the phone. And then he should have had Ryan Bruss disclose it to the ministry as well.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. They hold all the cards. And what they've done with those cards, what's coming out, it's horrible. And again, the ethics in secular companies are more godly than how the church systems handle. And that, like, I have friends that work for Edward Jones. And I remember her saying, like, the policy is like, if there's an affair, especially if it's someone within the company, you're gone. Doesn't matter how much you produce. Like, there's just strong moral ethics. And I'm like, what the heck is wrong with the church?
It's this idea of mercy and grace that we think is so, the term is abused completely because it's all about, it's not like if somebody had an affair in the church, you're going to get kicked out of the church. But if you're a leader, you have to be out of leadership. You have to. Yeah.
And not for 6 months.
Right.
Right.
Because that's the thing, like Ryan, and that was Mike's whole response. He took a break. He did menial jobs. To me, it's like, what's a menial job? Like, I'm sorry. I respect all work. Like, it is not punishment to work a secular job if you're called to ministry. Like, so the response to that. But yeah, so sadly, it has, since all this has come out, I mean, in my mind, once I knew the extent of what Ryan did in Texas, I mean, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to think it's probably happened more than once, especially if there was really no accountability. And even, I know this for a fact, even the staff at Fire, only a very small select few knew about Ryan's history in Texas. Like, the staff wasn't even aware of the extent, let alone the student body and the church. But as this came out in the Roy's report, different people start talking, different dots get connected. It's amazing. And I'll say this, I was really nervous with my name being connected to this because, again, I haven't been connected in these circles 15, 20 years. I was really worried because I knew the allegiance that people had to Mike. And I was just waiting for my inboxes to just be flooded with rebukes. I have been so pleasantly surprised. People from around the world that have written me, thanking me for speaking out, and even saying, I trust you. Like, if you're saying this, I trust you. It's been beautiful. But through this too, like, more stuff's coming out that's just heartbreaking. Like the whole thing with Ray. I mean, I was made aware of that in 2020 when Chris Bennett was told by Sarah about the letter, and that grieved me. I had zero respect for Mike at that time, and I still could not believe, especially with this woman. If people knew who this woman was, it's just like, you think you had the audacity to prey upon this precious woman. Just kind of, it's just so unrighteous. But anyway, through this, I've gotten in touch with different people. And there's one girl that reached out to me and told me about a situation with her friend, who I've since connected with the friend who's a direct victim, who in Charlotte, I think this is within a year and a half, was working with Ryan. I'm not giving any names or details. I have permission to share this, but I told him I would keep it completely anonymous. But Ryan had gotten pretty personal with this one girl, texting her a lot, emailing her a lot. The woman, I believe, started to really start feeling uncomfortable. Fast forward, it got so out of hand that Ryan messaged her a pornographic picture of himself. And after she saw it, I think he could see she saw it, he deleted it, but also sent a text, I'm paraphrasing, but along the lines of like, I can't stop fantasizing, thinking about you or having sex with you. I know she has a screenshot of that. So there's proof, heartbreaking, like just again, that righteous indignation just rose up in me hearing this girl had to go through that. And this woman confronted the ministry, and she, like a day or two later, gets an email that she's being fired because she's not holding to some ethics in the handbook. As I said, I spoke with her today because I wanted to I didn't want to allude to even any of this without her permission and her feeling comfortable. And she 1,000,000% said, yes, she's staying anonymous for now, which I totally respect. I have full confidence that she'll one day find the courage where she can share this, especially if it brings her healing. But yeah, so she had this horrific situation happen. That was horrific enough. And then she goes to her spiritual leaders again, looking for like truth, exposure, probably some solace and like a safe place. And she gets fired. And I just can't imagine the piling up of trauma from what Ryan did, losing your job, probably losing your community, and then getting fired. Like, I have no words.
And this girl worked with Ryan. Like
yes,
at that ministry. So
yeah. Sorry. I just want to know if you even know, like, what did they say when they fired her? You can't be like, okay, you're being like sexually harassed and yeah, so you're fired. Like, do you know how they fired her?
She said basically they basically like really vague, didn't even say, but you didn't abide by our rule book or handbook for employment, which they didn't even reference what they were talking about. And her friend as well, who was blowing the whistle on this, got fired. So just complete injustice, probably illegal.
Sounds like it.
And I'll say this, and I know way less, and I haven't spoken. This I can say with all authority because I've spoken to the victim herself. She has given me permission. But there are also a good handful of other stories that are circulating that I know are going to come to the surface regarding Ryan. Ryan even confessed to this one victim that he had an affair. I think he even said it was someone in Charlotte. So we're talking about a repeat offender, someone who is not safe, someone, whether it's at a school, wherever, he should not be given authority over people, especially in the church, in the name of Jesus. Like, this is inappropriate on all levels.
Yeah. And I think in so many ways, just to kind of wrap this section up, but like repeat offenders like Ryan, repeat offenders like Mike Bickle, repeat offenders in these situations, I think that so many ministers say these days, they're like, how is this helping the body of Christ for you guys to talk about this or expose this stuff? Here's what I'm going to say is that the world, like Paul said it in 1 Corinthians 5. I could quote the Apostle Paul to that objection and just say, Paul said, not even the world acts this way. Right. Regarding the man who was in 1 Corinthians 5, who was sleeping with his mother-in-law. He said, not even the world acts this way. And he said, do the right thing. And the right thing is remove the evil person from among you. Yes. Someone told me the other day, they said, well, Blaise, how is that the ministry of reconciliation that Paul talked about? We're called to be reconciliation ministers. I said, well, the amazing thing about removing the evil person from among you in 1 Corinthians 5 was that in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, it actually comes full circle. He says, you guys obeyed, you got rid of that person, and it actually caused him to repent. Now bring him back in. If there's any reconciliation, it comes with not this false mercy that we have. Right. We have this false grace and false mercy for these teachers and ministers that when we remove them and we lay down the law, you're going to find out if they are actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. Right. Who will have ungodly sorrow and self-pity and run, or they'll have godly sorrow and they'll repent and they won't be addicted to the platform and need another ministry. Right. They'll be like, oh, wow, thank you for confronting me. I'm ready to get my life right, my marriage right, my family right. And the world would actually respect the body of Christ more when 100%. They hear us, when they hear you coming forward and saying, I'm going to blow the whistle. When they hear Londa, when they hear this girl telling her story through you anonymously, they're like, wow, people are actually willing to stand up to these ministers that literally use the gospel for their own gain, not just money, but their sexual gratification and power. Yes. And we're saying it is a time for reformation, and that time is done. So go ahead.
Yes. No, I agree. And I've often been grieved that as a church culture, it's like, we will boycott Starbucks, or we'll boycott Disney, and we'll we'll be so outspoken against this liberal far left agenda, but then we're silent when there's grievances in the church. And I'm like, if as a believer and as church leaders, we're willing to speak out against egregious behavior in spheres that we're not even like called to judge, but then when it's happening among our own, we cover. And it's like, well, where's the grace card for everyone else? We are so selective with the grace card. And that's where, like you said, it's not grace. It's covering, and kind of, it's a good old boys club. And I will say too, I have been so pleasantly surprised, because I was really concerned leading up to this too. I was like, am I going to get sued? I have a couple lawyer friends. I called them. I'm like, it's one thing for me, but I have a husband and 3 kids. I don't want to drag my family into this. And I have been amazed at how God has brought so much healing to people through this.
Yes.
And when we think of a move of God, like, I don't see it as like exposure like this, but I have seen, and I've even connected with some of the advocates from the IHOP Kansas City through this, the threading, and even connecting with you guys. I've connected with amazing person Mike Winger, connected with Ron Cantor, and we're in touch with Sarah several times a week. We're in touch with Ron. We're just kind of banding together, and even previous students from Fire Brownsville, so many casualties. There's so many people that were kind of left battered on the side of the road, just so disenchanted from the just the unhealthiness in those ministries, the imbalance. So many of those people are reconnecting through like a private grads page that we've had. I've had people reach out to me saying, for the first time, my heart has been warm towards the Lord again. And
Wow.
God's ways are so beyond ours. I don't think I ever would have predicted exposing sexual allegations would spur people to come back to God. But I think people that wanted authenticity, they gave their lives to something, kind of to find out some of it was a sham. Of course, God isn't, but just the people we followed. But to see people with the right heart and right mind blowing the whistle on that has actually brought like light and freedom. And it's just beautiful. And I've been pondering too so much when Jesus opens the scroll of Isaiah, saying like why the Spirit of the Lord is on him. And that's why I want to even speak even to this person that opened up to me about Ryan and what she did, and Sarah, Ray's wife, and the countless others that are out there. It's like Jesus's heart is to bring freedom to the oppressed and to give voice to these people. And like I've told this girl too, that I'm speaking with the most latest victim that we're aware of, I said, you need to know there's an army behind you. And I'm just so glad people like you guys, I mean, we're all kind of now connected in a way through all this. And people are not alone. If there's people that have a story or a grievance or an allegation, there's a safe space now. This is not 20 years ago where no one was going to believe you, where you're going to be pushed to the side and forgotten while the powerful men of God keep getting promoted and rich and bigger platforms. There's a culture shift. And I really believe God is being glorified in it. And I'm here for it. That's why I'm speaking to you guys. I have no agenda in talking about this. Like you guys, I have 3 kids. I work. I'm busy. But this has become something I'm very passionate about. I do this for Sarah. I do this for my sister. I do this for people that have been run over by the bus of these men who just keep going. They wipe their mouths and go on as if they've done nothing wrong. And I'm so grateful there's platforms now for these people to have their stories shared and heard.
Yeah, I love it. Were you going to ask a question?
That's awesome. Well, that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to say one thing. I want to kind of go back a little bit to the admin who had to the woman who had to like publicly confess that she had an affair. And you said this was not somebody who was like one of the leaders, no. She was just an admin. So just this idea of this culture where you mentioned the woman will be confronted if sitting with a man at the school. Just it's always the woman's fault. And I just think that's something we have to pay attention to and be aware of, because it's because these guys are in charge. It's because these men are in charge, and it has to be the woman's fault, because otherwise
they have to step down.
They have to step down. Right. And it's easy to think, even like you said, like when we were younger, I would have blamed the woman too, because you see this man on stage all the time, and he's the most godliest person we know, and he knows the entire Bible. And if something happened, he would not have done that, because we know him. We see his like love for God all the time. So he had to have been like tempted by her. She had to have been like seduce him, because we don't get to see her, relationship with God. We don't get to see her quiet time, or, and so we automatically just believe that the woman is at fault, and it's just not true. It's just not true. And unfortunately, it's usually the exact opposite, that they're preyed on. And because they are sincere, because they do love Jesus, because they do want to know more, and they want to be closer to Jesus. And this is what they see as a way to it, is like being mentored by these spiritual fathers. And it's just very, very sad. And I just think it's something we have to be aware of.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, as a man too, in this thing, like listening to like the last year and a half, like, because the reality is when people listen, they'll go, well, sometimes a woman does do something. Well, of course, sometimes anybody does something, right? But if we look at these situations, and I am not the type that's like, destroy the patriarchy. That is not me at all. But when I look at these situations, I'm like, men who have narcissistic, control, manipulative tendencies, they can't be in power. They have to be exposed, and they have to be removed. I do not think the Apostle Paul was anything like any of these men at all. And so the problem is that the wrong men are doing the wrong things, and their personalities are what keep them in power. It's not their personalities, their biblical knowledge, and their charisma keep them in power. And then there's maybe some spiritual atmosphere, spiritual gifts that take place through their lives or through their preaching, but there's no humility and there's no true fear of the Lord. No. In Matthew 7, or Jesus literally says, there will be men that prophesy in his name, that cast out demons in his name, and that do many signs and wonders in his name. And he will say, I never knew you, depart from me. So what does that tell me? It tells me that there can be a man preaching, speaking, knowing the Bible, even seeing some like razzmatazz, signs and wonders here and there, but it does not mean that they're godly. It does not mean, like, the fruit of their lives is the truth of their lives. End of story. And when you have allegations that circle like this, I mean, I know false allegations exist sometimes. We were dealing with one guy that we were talking to, and we saw a false allegation. We're like, well, that is clearly but like, we have gotten allegation after allegation after allegation for the last year and a half, meaning people have sent us messages, and we're like, we know what these things look like. We know that people like, we know what these stories look like, and 92 to 98% of these things that come forward are 100% true when they come forward. So my point in saying all that is just to say that I believe that what we're watching in this time is a reformation in male leadership, changing to. I think the younger men, I'm just going to say for myself, age 42, I look at guys like Remnant Radio guys and Mike Winger, different guys I've talked to, where I'm like, I think that we're done with that style of leadership. Like, we don't need to, and I'm not even just talking about the SA stuff, but just the style of leadership that's all about manipulation, control, and you cannot touch me. I'm the covering, the man of God. I'm anointed. Don't confront me. If you're going to do it in Matthew 18. It's just like, hey, you got a problem? Just talk to me. Let's talk. Oh, y'all want to talk about it publicly? Go for it. Like, let me jump in there. Right. Okay, what is it? Like, we should not be the only people that are afraid of confronting these things publicly are people that have things to hide. And
absolutely.
So anyway, that's
no, and it's so good you said that. And one thing, we're at a church here in Metro Detroit, and no church is perfect. There is so much I love, because my husband is on staff there part-time. He teaches from time to time. And one of the things that they've always said, if you're ever sharing a story in your message and you're the hero of that story, or you're painted in a good light, I really question the motive of you sharing that story.
That's
and
awesome.
It's awesome. And their whole thing is, do not preach to the people, you preach among them. And just, it is so healing coming out of, the larger than life charismatic. It's funny because, again, I haven't listened to these voices in years, and with all this resurfacing, I kind of have gone and watched some YouTube, and even watching Ryan recently, and probably every other sentence was like, this is a prophetic word, listen to me, this is a prophetic word I'm sharing. And there's just this like conjuring up of, demanding like attention and authority, and it's not safe. And I think we can see that type of ministry and authoritative leadership, where touch not the Lord's anointed and don't question anything, is just a breeding ground for predators. Whether every man that operates like that is a predator, I don't believe that, but it certainly paves the way. It kind of lays the groundwork for that. And when you look at how Jesus lived and talked among the people, and the disciples and the apostles, it's so different than what we're seeing. And I agree 1,000,000%. And I love, even Mike Winger shared something the other day. He's like, hey, this just in. Millions of pulpits across America are filled, with godly men, faithful to their wives, love the Lord, integrous, and their names will never be known.
Yep.
And I think that's always a good balance, because it's like, this exposure is so necessary, but it's not everybody.
That's
For
true.
all the men that do this, there's 1,000 good ones.
That's true.
But it's just, these are the loud ones. That I don't think Christianity was ever supposed to be making people rich and book sales and lights, camera, action. I think that you remove yourself from grace because it's a slippery slope, and it's just not bode well. Just look at the headlines the last couple years.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much, Kat, for coming on our show. This has been a really great conversation. Christina, do you have any final thoughts or final questions for Kat?
Well, I do. Again, just want to say, thank you so much, because it is so important. I said this on Londa's, but just in case people didn't hear that one, just hear this one. I want to say how important it is, because there are people, who want to keep saying like, accuser of the brethren, or y'all are gossiping, or wait for the investigation. But the truth is, this is what people need to know. As we are older now, we're not those kids who like don't know what a marriage is supposed to look like and don't know what parents are supposed to do. And you can convince us or make us believe that smacking a girl on the butt and kissing her on the mouth is a father-daughter relationship. Like, the fact that they want us to believe that is ridiculous. We're not stupid. And people need to know what they're getting into. As a mom, like you said, like, we want people to know about Ryan. We want people to know about Dr. Michael Brown, because again, I don't know what's going to happen with the investigation. Like, I think a lot's going to come out. I don't know how much is going to actually be shared with us. And even if it is, I don't trust that the board thinks that it's enough to disqualify him, since we know that they all believe that like Ryan is okay to go from spot to spot ministering. So is Dr. Michael Brown going to be disqualified from ministry in their eyes? I don't know. Probably not. But what we can do is let people know so that they can make a decision if he's somebody they want to follow, if he's somebody they want to donate, as he's currently fundraising on his newsletter in the midst of this
his sabbatical.
Yes, exactly. While he's being investigated for clergy sexual misconduct, he is fundraising and telling people that he's enjoying his sabbatical. It's mind-blowing. And they're trying
I don't know
to...
if you guys know this. There's over 50 people, last I heard, maybe more, that have submitted surveys for the investigation. So that should be very telling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Over 50.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, we don't know what people are going to do, what the board's going to do, what Firefly's going to do fully, and how it's all going to work out. But we do know, just to your point, that we're not trying to harm Dr. Michael Brown. We're not trying to harm his ministry. That is not the goal with these things. We weren't trying to harm IHOP. We're trying to protect the flock from people that have utilized power. Okay, fine. You don't want to call them wolves. Okay, fine. You can call them what you want, but they've utilized their power to pursue the vulnerable. And so what we're going to do is turn it on its head. You've got the big platform. You've got the big money. You've got the this. And thank God for social media. Thank God for social media, and it's got its downsides, of course, but like thank God for the ability to speak freely, that we're able to do that, and that people can go and listen for themselves and judge for yourself. As you listen to this, judge for yourself. You know, Catherine's story, judge for yourself, because it's Londa's story that we're posting. Judge for yourself. Chris Bennett's interview that we did, judge for yourself. And you know, this, hopefully it empowers many, many others to come forward and speak out and whistleblow when they need to. And this is just, I agree. I think we said it with Londa too. It was like, this is a move of God. This is a move of God, and it's not us falling on the floor laughing. It's not like big preachers on the stage. It is literally the people of God coming together, and people's faith is being restored. People that lost their faith in Christ because of this downfalls, or because of these what they saw behind the scenes without accountability, they're now going, wow, I'm coming back to the Lord. So anyway, I think our daughter might be waking up, so I think we might shut this one down, Kat. But any final thoughts from you?
No, and I don't do this often. I'll be super quick. Can I pray for you guys?
Yes,
of course.
please.
Yes. All right. Yes. Thank you, God, so much for this couple, and that you've even just put it on my heart to pray for them. And I just want to speak a blessing over their marriage, over their family. I thank you for the work that they're doing, exposing darkness. Sometimes, a lot of times when that happens, there can be a shaking and an intimidation, and we know that there's a spiritual battle. And I just pray that they would continue to find their strength in you, your presence, God, in one another, that you would just build their marriage as such a strong foundation that it just would be such a testimony to the world. I thank you that you're using them in the way that you are. Continue blessing, continue provision, and we just love you, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.